Okay, so get ready for a deep dive into a case that's going to really stay with you. It's legally fascinating, but also just really emotionally heavy. We're looking at a Philippine Supreme Court decision
Yeah.
about a family that's basically been torn apart by accusations of rape.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough case, no doubt about it.
And the court's reasoning is really going to get you thinking.
Yeah, and we're gonna unpack all of that. Why the court decided to convict a mother for the rape of her own daughter, but they acquitted the father.
Okay.
So there are twists and turns, conflicting stories, and a lot of really crucial legal stuff. Precedents at play.
I am intrigued. I'm hooked already. So
Yeah.
where does this story even begin?
Well, this Supreme Court decision that we're looking at, it's from August 2023, but to really understand it, we kind of have to rewind way back to 2008 to Pangasinan, Philippines. That's where we meet this 14-year-old girl, AAA. And she accuses her father, XXX, of, well, a horrific crime,
Okay.
raping her in their family home.
So we're dealing with a really disturbing situation right off the bat. But you said the father was acquitted in this specific instance.
That's right. And here's where it gets even more complicated. AAA claimed that her mother, YYY, was actually there during the assault.
Oh, my God.
And not just like passively present. According to AAA, her mother held her feet down while this was happening.
Oh, that is just chilling.
Yeah?
It's awful. It's hard to even comprehend something like that happening, especially within a family.
It's truly horrific. And because of that, because of the mother's alleged role, the court had to kind of grapple with this legal concept called common design. Basically, this precedent says that someone can be found guilty of a crime, even if they weren't the one who physically did it.
Right.
If the court decides that they shared a common intention to commit that crime.
So even though AAA said it was her father who raped her, the court is looking at, did the mother's actions, as described by AAA, did that indicate an intent to participate in the crime?
Exactly. But there's another layer to all of this. AAA's sister, BBB, also accused their father of rape. However, those charges were dismissed.
Wait, okay, hold on. So we have two daughters, both accusing their father of rape. One case leads to an acquittal, the other is dismissed. What is going on here?
And this is where you really start to see how complex these types of cases are.
Right.
In BBB's case, the accusations were from incidents that happened after she turned 18.
So, legally an adult at the time of the alleged assaults. I imagine that changes the legal dynamics significantly.
Absolutely, yeah. However, during the trial, BBB actually recanted her accusations against her father.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that creates a really complicated situation for the court to try to figure out.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we have all of these conflicting stories.
Yeah.
How did the court even begin to make sense of it all? What evidence did they use to reach these decisions?
That's a key point. You've hit on something really crucial there. The court was dealing with a lot of different narratives.
Right.
You have AAA claiming both of her parents were involved in her rape. You have BBB initially accusing her father, but then taking it back. And then, of course, you have both parents denying any wrongdoing. So how do you sift through all of that? Well, that's where this legal concept of corroboration becomes really important.
Okay, so what exactly is corroboration, and how did it come into play here?
So corroboration basically means finding other evidence that backs up or confirms a witness's testimony. It's essentially looking for other pieces of the puzzle that help paint a clearer picture of what happened.
So in a case like this, with so much uncertainty and conflicting information, corroboration would have been really important for the court to try to figure out, okay, whose accounts do we find credible here?
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting from a legal standpoint, particularly when we start looking at how common design was used in this case.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get why this whole common design thing is so important here. But it's still a bit fuzzy for me. What did the mother actually do that made the court view her as, like, participating in this, even if she wasn't the one?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Physically assaulting her daughter.
That's a good question. And to really understand it, we got to look at AAA's actual testimony from the courtroom.
Okay.
And, you know.
Okay.
I will warn you, it's disturbing stuff.
Yeah.
But she gave very specific details. She said her mother woke her up and told her to lay down next to her father.
Oh, my gosh.
And then, according to AAA, her mother physically held AAA's feet down while the assault was happening.
Just horrific.
It is, yeah. And the court really zeroed in on these details. They said that these actions showed like a unity of purpose and intention with the father to commit the crime. So basically, they found enough evidence to say, okay, the mother wasn't just a bystander. Her actions directly helped make this abuse happen.
So even though the father was physically the one who assaulted AAA, the court said that the mother's participation made her equally guilty in the eyes of the law.
Exactly. And this is precisely where that whole common design thing becomes so important.
Right.
It lets the court hold people accountable even if, like you were saying, their role wasn't the actual physical act of the crime, as long as they can show that that person knew what was happening and was actively part of the plan to carry out that crime.
Right. And it sounds like in this case, with what AAA said, the court felt that that was enough.
Right.
To establish that this wasn't just something that she was unaware of, that she was an active participant. I imagine the defense had something to say about all of this. What arguments did they present to counter these pretty serious accusations?
Yeah, good point. You're absolutely right. The defense definitely tried to challenge all of this. And one thing they brought up was that AAA didn't immediately go to the authorities after the rape.
Right. We've seen that before, unfortunately.
Yeah,
trying to discredit the victim based on their response. You know, and as we've talked about before, there are so many reasons why someone who has experienced sexual abuse might not come forward right away, especially when it's apparent.
Exactly. The psychological impact of something like this, and in a family, it's just so complicated. And thankfully, the court recognized that. They said that there's no one-size-fits-all way a victim of sexual abuse is supposed to act, and especially when it's someone who has power over them, like a parent.
That's such an important point, that the court acknowledged that power dynamic.
Yeah.
Because that's huge in these situations. So that justice is actually served.
Did the defense bring up any other arguments?
They did. They actually argued that because of the family's living situation, like the layout of their home, that it would have been impossible for this to even happen.
Oh, interesting. So they were saying that there wasn't enough privacy in the house for this assault to have taken place.
Exactly. They were trying to use their living situation as an alibi.
Okay.
However, the court wasn't buying it.
Okay.
They basically said, look, just because the circumstances don't perfectly align with what you might expect, that doesn't mean
a crime like this couldn't have happened.
Right. Just because there's not some ideal scenario laid out doesn't mean that it couldn't have occurred, especially something as horrific as this.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the mother's conviction here, you know, the arguments back and forth.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that the father, while he was acquitted of the charges related to AAA, he was found guilty of separate rape charges.
Yeah.
But those were related to BBB.
You're exactly right. And we can't just gloss over that. It adds another whole layer to this whole thing.
Right. So to be clear here, we have two separate sets of charges against the father.
Yeah.
Stemming from accusations from two different daughters.
Yes. Two different daughters. And it's important to keep those separate. In AAA's case, she was a minor. She was just 14 at the time. And her mother was also accused of being involved. And the court decided that there wasn't enough evidence to convict the father on those specific charges.
But they did convict the mother based on what AAA said and that whole common design idea.
Yeah.
Okay. But with BBB, it's different because she was legally an adult.
Right.
When her father allegedly assaulted her.
You got it. And even though BBB did come forward with those accusations, she did later recant them during the trial. But, and this is a big but, the court doesn't have to throw out a case.
Right.
Just because a victim changes their mind.
That makes sense. I mean, think about it. There are all sorts of reasons why someone might recant their statement. Especially in a situation, you know, as messy and as potentially traumatic as this one. So how did the court ultimately reach a decision in the father's case when it came to BBB's accusations?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really important to remember, that recanting. You know, it doesn't just erase everything, especially in a case like this where there's, you know, family and potential pressure and fear, all of that. So with BBB recanting her statement, what was it that ultimately led to her father's conviction in her case?
Well, even though she recanted, the court still had to, look at all the evidence.
Right.
Right? And that includes everything that was said and done before the recantation. And in this case, they decided there was enough there, even without that testimony, to say, yeah, we think something happened here.
Wow. Okay, so even though she recanted the other things that were presented, maybe medical records or other people saying that they had seen things.
Yeah, or
that was enough.
Testimonies, exactly.
To convince the court that this did in fact happen.
That's right. Remember that term corroboration?
Right?
We
Right.
were talking about before. This is a great example of that in action.
Yeah.
They don't just go off of one person's word,
Right.
especially with something like this. They want to make sure that there's enough there so that, the right outcome happens.
That makes sense. So it's about building a case on more than just one person's account.
Right.
What was the father's sentence in BBB's case?
He also got a sentence of reclusion perpetua.
Wow. So life sentences for both parents for different crimes.
Right.
And under very different circumstances. It's just this whole case with how it went back and forth, conflicting accounts.
Yeah, it's a lot.
The common design precedent. Wow. It's a lot.
To really highlight how complicated these situations can be.
It really is. And if our listeners take away one thing from all of this, I hope it's that there are rarely easy answers in cases like this.
Right.
We saw how the court had to, deal with the different things people were saying, figure out this whole common design idea, and see if there was enough other evidence to back things up. That's a lot of responsibility. And it just shows you how important it is to have a system for these really, really sensitive and difficult situations, especially when it's happening in a family.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate the work that goes into these legal proceedings.
For sure. It's not just as easy as, someone said this, so it must be true. They really have to look at all these different angles
Yeah.
and the different things people did and how families work and the psychology of abuse. It's a lot.
It is. It's about seeing the whole picture,
Yeah.
not just these little snapshots. And it really makes you think about the law. It's not just rules, right? It's like a way to deal with all the complicated things that we go through as people.
This deep dive has really given me a lot to think about, especially when it comes to these really difficult cases of abuse in families and how the justice system handles them. It really shows you that getting to the truth and making sure that people are held responsible is not always easy. And it's not always a straight line. It can be really messy.
It can be, definitely. And I think for anyone listening, it makes you think about, those power dynamics that happen in families and what we can do to make things better for the people who are hurting the most. That's a conversation that we need to keep having.
Absolutely. And cases like this can really teach us a lot about the challenges, but also the progress that's being made.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been really heavy and really important.
It has. Thank you.